Okay, so 5.NF.5. This one has us interpreting again. That means explaining something in a different way. Now, what we're interpreting with this standard is multiplication as scaling. That's a new word, and we're going to use it in mathematics, and it's going to be something new that we have to really practice using. It's going to start by comparing fractions without evaluating. We need to be able to look at multiplication problems and know what's going to happen and which is going to be more or less. We're also going to explain the difference of multiplying a fraction greater than 1 versus multiplying a fraction less than 1. What that means is, if you start with a whole number like 5 and you multiply it times a fraction that's less than 1, the result is that that initial 5, it shrinks or scales down. So that 5, when you multiply it times a fraction less than 1, that 5 is going to become less than 5. Okay? Just by looking at the expression, we're going to be able to compare this 5 to what it becomes. Likewise, if we take that same 5 and we multiply it times something more than 1, 5 over 1, well, that's the same as just plain 5, isn't it? But it is definitely more than 1. It's a fraction written at more than 1. And when you look at this and you say 5 times this fraction, well, that's obviously going to result in the 5 growing, getting bigger, or scaling up. All right? So that's the basic idea of comparing without evaluating and explaining the difference between multiplying a fraction less than 1 versus greater than 1. Now, when we look at an example, and we look at maybe starting with 1/3, if we start with 1/3, okay? See these three sections? 1, 2, 3. We start with 1/3 and we multiply times 4/5. This is less than 1. 4/5 is less than 1. 5/5 would be 1 whole. 4/5 is less than a whole. So what happens to the 1/3 when you multiply it times something less than 1? It shrinks. It scales down. Okay? So you end up with less than what you started with. If you look at the same 1/3, okay, and you multiply it times 5/5, well, 5/5 is 1 whole. 5 divided by 5 is 1. If you have 5 pieces of 5 total, then you have the whole piece. You have the whole thing. And so if you multiply 1/3 times 5/5, you're going to end up with 5/15, or 1/3. It's going to stay the same. But notice the fraction that was smaller caused the 1/3 to scale down. And if you look at 1/3, again, that same fraction that we're starting with, if you look at it and you see that it's being multiplied times 6/5, that's more than 1 whole. You have 6 pieces, where you only need 5 pieces to make a whole. You end up with 1 extra piece. That's more than 1. And what happens is you end up with 6/15, which is more than 1/3. So you're scaling up or scaling down depending on how you're multiplying against a fraction less than 1 versus more than 1. So by interpreting, comparing, and explaining, you are mastering 5.NF.5.